Jewish Channel's Week in Review. The Freedom Flotilla heads for Gaza. Will it avoid the violence from last year? Looking at Hebron from behind a camera, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now on this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Avoiding violent encounters at sea, like those between Israeli soldiers and humanitarian activists last year, is a primary concern in the Jewish state this week. Last year's violence aboard the ship Mavi Marmara saw 10 activists killed, including one American, in clashes with Israeli soldiers trying to board the ship. The Mavi Marmara had been part of a humanitarian mission to break Israel's blockade of Gaza. A new mission of the so-called Freedom Flotilla was set to launch this week after multiple delays and disappointments for organizers. The Mavi Marmara ship, which is owned by a Turkish humanitarian group labeled a terrorist organization by Israel and the European Union, won't be participating this time around due to the ship's failure to meet inspection standards. Several other ships, including an American one, have also failed to clear inspections on time. The 10 ships this year will be fewer than last year's 15, and the hundreds of activists this year will be fewer than last year's thousands. And yet, so many will be waiting with bated breath for what is to result. For those opposed to the blockade, last year's incident brought death and failure of the humanitarian mission. For those in support of the blockade, the IDF's killing of 10 activists brought immediate and broad international condemnation, as well as multiple wounded soldiers. Complicating this year's mission is the question of just who is in control of Gaza, and also of who exactly is enforcing a blockade against it. A much-touted unity deal appears to have stalled between Hamas, which has controlled Gaza for several years, and Fatah, which controls the West Bank. Questions over leadership and other issues have kept Hamas and Fatah from finalizing the deal. This means that what could have been a humanitarian mission to an area controlled in part by Fatah, which is seen as a more legitimate political entity in the West, is now one to an area controlled by Hamas, which is nearly universally categorized as a terrorist organization in the West. Further complicating the Gaza blockade is Egypt's involvement in the matter. The temporary Egyptian military government that has taken over after former President Hosni Mubarak resigned had initial hopes for keeping the border with Gaza open. In recent months, however, security and other concerns in Egypt have left that border more often closed than open. Israel's security cabinet has officially ordered the IDF to keep the flotilla from reaching Gaza, and the Israeli government has restated its standing offer to bring humanitarian aid directly to Gaza if it is delivered to an Israeli port. However, activists now and in the past have asserted that Israel has taken too long to inspect and transport humanitarian goods in the past, such that medicines and other items have gone expired before reaching Gaza. It is not clear, however, whether the IDF or the government has made special plans to capture the flotilla's ships. A lack of planning last year was widely cited as a failure when soldiers confronted with violent resistance did not have sufficient non-lethal weaponry to subdue activists without resorting to live ammunition. And in a sign that the Israeli government hasn't learned the lessons of just the publicity disaster from last year, the head of the government press office temporarily threatened to deny journalists entry to Israel for 10 years if they joined the flotilla, a threat the government quickly backed away from. And though the flotilla has fewer members and ships this year, it is receiving a publicity boost thanks to the presence of Alice Walker, the Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist and author of The Color Purple, who said in an interview with Foreign Policy, quote, "I think Israel is the greatest terrorist in that part of the world." However, to provide context, Walker also referred to the United States as, quote, "a great terrorist organization." Walker is one of several dozen Americans joining the flotilla, though the U.S. State Department has said that Americans involved in the flotilla could face fines and jail time upon their return to the U.S. Meanwhile, the Jewish state's concerns over violence are also pointing inward this week after the arrest of the leading rabbi of the West Bank settlements over allegations he's endorsed violence against non-Jews. Rabbi Dov Lior had endorsed a book, Torat HaMelech, which advocates killing non-Jewish non-combatants in certain situations during wartime. Lior had been requested by Israeli police to present himself for questioning in February and had not met that request or repeated subsequent requests in the months since. His arrest and subsequent release was met by massive protest of at least hundreds of demonstrators, and the rabbi was carried off on their shoulders. A very different story of a detained Israeli is that of captive Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit, who was captured by Hamas and has not been allowed visits from the International Red Cross. This week marked the 5th anniversary of his capture. There has been no sign of life release since this September 2009 video, and Hamas has rejected the Red Cross's requests for a new video. Israel has been negotiating with Hamas for Shalit's release and has said in the past that it might include Shalit's release among the terms of an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. Hamas is said to be requesting the release of 1,000 Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails, including many who've been convicted of murdering Israelis. Meanwhile, a new film looks at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the specific area of Hebron. Christian Needon has that story.
Of all the Jewish settlements in the West Bank, Hebron is perhaps the most well-known flashpoint in the debate over settler presence in the Palestinian territories. It is the home to both the Cave of the Patriarchs and an enclave of around 500 settlers protected by the Israel Defense Forces, living amidst a sea of around 160,000 Palestinian Arabs. The more contentious aspects of the relationship between these two groups is at the center of This Is My Land, Hebron, a documentary by filmmakers Julia Amati and Stephen Natanson, who were at Lincoln Center this week to present their film as part of the Human Rights Watch Film Festival. And the reaction of this audience was mixed, with a few walking out during the screening, others clapping their approval, and still others, like this man who said he was from Israel, voicing concern over what they saw as a one-sided narrative in favor of the Palestinian subjects of the film. That's because the film's most bracing footage is of Jewish settlers physically and verbally abusing Arabs and foreign peace activists, while there is no such footage involving Palestinian aggressors. I asked the deputy director of the festival about reaction elsewhere and the accusations of one-sidedness.
The reactions are widely varied, and I think that's because people come to the film with a variety of perspectives. The film itself has sort of a combination of footage from Hebron provided by a number of different groups who've been active there, but it also includes several interviews with various well-known journalists, former members of Knesset, and people living there, both Palestinians and Israeli settlers. So the reception has been interesting in that I think different people react to different individuals within the film and different stories within the film. And it actually is very interesting because audience members then engage with one another, which I think actually helps move the discussion forward.
To see more from the Lincoln Center screening of This Is My Land, Hebron, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Trying to support certain initiatives in Israel, the National Council for Jewish Women held a recent fundraiser, and Rebecca Honig-Friedman was there.
The problems facing the Middle East couldn't seem farther from this idyllic setting here at the pond in Central Park. But inside the Central Park boathouse, a group of Jewish women was focused on finding solutions to one set of those problems: the inequalities facing women and children in Israel. At the National Council of Jewish Women's Israel Benefit Luncheon last week, members raised money and awareness for the organization's Israel Granting Program, which funds grassroots organizations that seek to educate at-risk populations and empower women in Israel. Signature concerns for this politically minded group.
We are concerned about women's rights and civil liberties and religious freedoms, all the things that concern women and then ultimately concern their families.
NCJW's empowerment programs are also designed to address the social inequalities that, according to NCJW's CEO, Nancy Kaufman, pose just as much a threat to Israel's future as external security concerns.
Between the fault lines between Arab and Jew, between the strong and the weak, between religious and secular, between rich and poor. There are enormous fault lines now in Israel, and we want to bridge those gaps.
Keynote speaker Jane Eisner, editor of The Forward and host of TJC's The Salon, addressed one of those gaps, the growing disparity between rich and poor in Israel. Eisner noted that of the 34 member countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Israel has the most poverty, and argued that the source of this poverty is largely the non-employment of ultra-Orthodox men and Arab women.
That these two groups share a sort of ignoble bond is really one of the deep ironies of Israel's society. Their structural poverty is caused or enabled by long-standing government policy.
Eisner praised NCJW's work on this issue, but emphasized that solving the problems would require government intervention. It's a lesson that Israel's Consul General to New York, Ido Aharoni, said the Israeli government has been slow to learn, having for a long time focused its attention on defending its borders instead of addressing the changing needs of its population.
Social change, social strength, economic strength, strong educational foundation, healthier social fabric. These are all elements that should be part and parcel with Israel's national security. This is a new kind of thinking that the Council nurtured for so many years and that we wrongly dismissed as unimportant.
For more from the NCJW Benefit Luncheon, and to hear about the future political plans of Florida State Senator Nan Rich, please watch the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Finally, a note on excellence in Jewish media. The Philadelphia Jewish Exponent has been declared the best weekly newspaper in the state of Pennsylvania for the second year in a row. TJC viewers will recall Jewish Exponent editor Lisa Hosteen from her appearances on our With the Editors program. TJC congratulates the Jewish Exponent on the award. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. IO Optimum Cable Channel 291, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, RCN Channel 268, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and Cox Cable Channel 1. For more information, visit tjctv.com.